I use a lot of stats when I talk about the Orioles on this show, but what do they all really mean? Let's do a little deep dive. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, April 9th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to do a deep dive on some of the stats that I cite here on this show. I am constantly talking about Orioles hitters and others and certain advanced stats to evaluate their performance, but let's dive deep into, beyond batting average, beyond home runs, beyond on-base percentage. What do some of these deeper stats really mean, and why are they important when evaluating baseball players in 2025? We're going to dive into all of that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So on today's episode, just to give a little disclaimer, you may have heard some of it if you checked out Tuesday's episode. If you haven't done that, make sure to go back and check out Tuesday's episode. Recapped the Orioles win in Game 1 in Arizona. Talked about Grant Wolfram, the new left-handed pitcher that they acquired. Talked about the potential injury for Zach Eflin coming out of that game. But I also kind of talked about the plan for the show this week. Because if you've been a listener for some of the 5 years I've been hosting Locked On Orioles, you know that with my other job responsibilities, when the Orioles are playing on the West Coast during the week and playing these games that Monday and Tuesday night started at 9:40 p.m. Eastern time, I'm usually up for most of the games, sometimes all of it, but with just my schedule of getting up and going to work the next morning, it is really, really tough for me to stay up for all 2.5+ hours of that game, record a show, edit a show, post a show, get ready for bed, go to bed, get up and have enough sleep to do what I need to do the next day. So because of that, generally, I will not recap games just as they happen when the Orioles are on the West Coast during the week. Now, I had a little bit of a schedule change where I was able to get out a Tuesday episode a little bit later and recap Monday's game. But this Wednesday episode is not going to have anything to do with Tuesday night's game between the Orioles and the D-backs. I'm actually recording it here just after 6 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. We're still 3.5 hours away from first pitch as I record. So hopefully Charlie Morton had his first good Orioles start and the O's clinched the series and won the game handily over the Diamondbacks. Not sure what happened as I record here, but hopefully that was the case. But either way, I still wanted to give you a Wednesday episode. Now, when I come back on Thursday, I'll have recaps of both the Tuesday night game and the Wednesday afternoon game to finish off that series in Arizona. I'll be recapping both games on Thursday's show. But for this Wednesday show, I got a really good idea from a listener named either Stefan or Stefan. Sorry, Stefan or Stefan, depending on the pronunciation, who emailed in and gave a suggestion for an episode that I absolutely loved. And I actually heard from this from a couple of other people as well. But Stefan's email was basically, could you take some time and explain how the most up-to-date player stats work, why they are good, or why you use them, and how they are calculated? For those of us older fans who grew up with batting average, RBIs, etc., these new stats can be a bit overwhelming. And I do agree. These new stats can be a bit overwhelming. And I've also gotten a lot of good feedback on an episode I did last year where I did a full breakdown on just how roster moves work in Major League Baseball, waivers and designated players for assignment and minor league options and roster limits and the injured list and all that good stuff. And I got a whole lot of positive feedback about just breaking down that system because it's something that when the Orioles make roster moves, I reference those things a lot. And on this show, when I'm evaluating Orioles players, I am referencing those stats as well. There's a lot of things I get to, so I wanted to split it into a hitters episode and a pitchers episode. The pitchers episode, I probably even talk about more data, so that might be even a deeper dive. But today I want to focus on the hitters, really the position players. What stats I use that are beyond batting average and home runs and doubles and things like that to evaluate the performance of Orioles hitters and Orioles hitters in their minor league system and players they acquire and how they've done in the past, and why I use those stats and how they are calculated. I felt that could be helpful to some. Some of you out there might be like, yeah, Connor, I know all this stuff. And some of you might be, I'm learning it. Some of you might have never been exposed to some of this stuff. Any of those levels, that is totally fine. I am so happy you are here enjoying the show, but I want to make sure the things I am talking about and referencing are, they're never going to be second nature. They're not even second nature to me at this point. I've been doing this show this way for 5 years, but that all of you have a better understanding. And I'm still trying to get a full understanding of a lot of these things, but to make sure that I'm not just saying a stat and a very new stat and glossing over what it means. I want everybody listening in, tuning in, to have a full understanding and to be able to see the game of baseball that a lot of people are seeing it, be able to see the game of baseball in a lot of different ways. And I want to make this an inclusive environment here on this show. I don't want to be just reading out a bunch of super high level stats that most people, including sometimes myself, have no idea what is going on. I want to bring a lot of us together so we can enjoy the Orioles watching baseball and enjoy the game as it changes here in 2025. So I'm going to start with the counting stats that I use. I would consider counting stats things like batting average. You can easily count that. Hits over at bats. Counting stats are home runs and doubles and strikeouts and walks. Those are all counting stats. But there are also some more advanced counting stats. And I think these are sometimes easier to understand because all of them at a base level start with those things like batting average and on-base percentage and home runs hit, but they advance them a little further. So the big thing I want to focus on in the counting stats that I talk about is WRC plus, as I will refer to it. That is weighted runs created plus is the stat. If you've been listening to the show for really any amount of time, you have heard me reference WRC plus at some point. It is my favorite stat to evaluate a hitter in Major League Baseball. My quick way of explaining it is an all-encompassing stat that allows you to compare players across the league and to fit all the skills of being a hitter, hitting for average, hitting for power, getting on base, and everything in between into one single stat. I think it is the best way to pit players against each other, rank players who do different things, because Luis Arraez, a slap hitter the other way, is a very different player than Aaron Judge, but they are both valuable players in their own way. The way that Gunnar Henderson impacts the game is different than the way that Adley Rutschman impacts the game when they are at the plate, but we want to be able to compare and contrast their performances. And WRC Plus does that in a great way. Now, WRC Plus started with just WRC, weighted runs created, which was a stat that used all facets of that offensive profile to find the number of, quote, runs that you create for your team, because baseball is all about runs. You score more runs, you're going to win games. You win more games, you go to the playoffs, you win a World Series. It is all about scoring runs. And then on the pitching side, it is all about preventing runs. At the base level, that is the name of the game that everybody can get on board with. So weighted runs created initially tried to find a stat to see how many runs does each player produce. Because yes, you can look at their RBI total and their physical runs scored total, but what other things are you doing? When you move a runner over, when you hit a fly ball that gets a guy from second to third, when you start a rally with a single, but then you're out on a force out, but eventually somebody comes in to score. There's really no way to calculate that, but you helped your team create some runs. And then out of weighted runs created came weighted runs created plus. The plus basically averages out that stat to make it adjusted for the ballpark you play in, adjusted for the year you're playing in, the era you're playing in, the offensive and pitching environment, to really allow you to compare players in one season and compare players across seasons and across eras. It really brings every offensive stat together into one. It is very in the weeds on how exactly it is calculated. It uses WOBA, which is weighted on base average, which is kind of an updated version of on base percentage, and using slugging percentage, and basically tries to throw together everything you can do as a hitter. WRC plus is a stat where league average is 100. If you have a 100 WRC plus, that means overall you are considered a league average hitter. And that league average changes year to year. Every number above and below 100 is a percentage above and below the average. So for example, last year, Jordan Westburg for the Orioles had a 125 WRC plus. That means as a hitter overall, he was 25% better than MLB average in 2024. On the flip side, Jorge Mateo last season had an 87 WRC plus. That means overall he was 13% worse than a league average hitter in the big leagues last year. But last year is important because it is based off of the era and the year. For example, remember back in 2019 when it was proven that Major League Baseball was using the juiced balls that were bouncier, were flying out of the yard at higher velocities, moving further through the air. Guys were hitting more homers. All the home run records were shattered that year. Guys were hitting further home runs. And then it came out, we were using the juiced balls. They took those away. That was a huge offensive environment year. Stats were inflated that year. It also happened during the steroid era. Stats were inflated for obvious reasons. Versus last year, 2024, was really a pitcher-dominant year. We did not have the bouncy balls. We did not have the juice balls. We had pitchers getting better and better and hitters trying to catch up. So, for example, WRC Plus allows you to compare a player in 2019 versus a player in 2024 at a much better level. And this visual, I think, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, and I'll talk about these stats too, does the best job. And I took a good Orioles example. Here is Gunnar Henderson last year, finishes 4th in AL MVP. He was incredible. And wow, look at this graphic that I have up here that is already wrong. Great job, Connor. We're going to take that graphic off the page. I am going to pause my recording, although you're not going to see it happen, and I'm going to get you a correct graphic. You're getting a great look right now behind the scenes. If you're just listening on audio, you're like, what in the world just happened? If you're watching on YouTube, you could see, hey, I am a one-man production team over here, so sometimes stuff like that happens. Here is the actual graphic I wanted to show. This is comparing Trey Mancini's 2019 season with the Orioles and Gunnar Henderson's 2024 season with the Orioles. Now, Gunnar Henderson was great last year. Again, 4th in AL MVP voting. He hit 281, 364 on base, 529 slugging with 37 home runs, and finished with a 155 WRC plus, 55% better than a league average hitter. And then look at Trey Mancini's numbers from 2019 in that juiced ball era where all the offensive stats were inflated. 291 average, 10 points better than Gunnar. 364 on base, identical to Gunnar. 535 slugging, 6 points better than Gunnar, and 35 homers, just 2 less than Gunnar. Basically, I think you could say, hey, he had a pretty offensively equal season, statistically, did Mancini in 2019 to Gunnar in 2024. But while Gunnar had a 155 WRC plus, Mancini finished with a 132 WRC plus in 2019. And that is where the era adjusted part of this stat is so important. If you just looked at these base numbers for Trey and Gunnar without the WRC plus, you would say, wow, they had basically the same season. But when you take into the context of Mancini did that in this super juiced ball inflated offensive year, and Gunnar put up basically the same stats in a year where pitchers were dominating, that is where Gunnar is 55% better than average. Mancini is 32% better than average. And you can conclude that Henderson had a better season. And that is why Gunnar Henderson finished 4th in AL MVP voting. And I don't think Trey Mancini received any MVP votes. If he did, it would have been very few that season. That is really the big difference where this stat comes in clutch to compare people across different years. And it also uses the ballpark, because think back to Oriole Park in 2019. We'll throw these stats up again. Trey Mancini was playing with the old wall, the pre-2022 wall at Oriole Park. Very short wall, very close to home plate in left field for a right-handed hitter in Mancini who could just poke balls over the wall in left. Now, I know Gunnar Henderson's a lefty, and he still has a good short porch out there in right field, but think about it. Gunnar Henderson only hit 1 opposite field home run last year at Oriole Park because it was impossible to do it. Mancini hit more of those as a right-hander in 2019, and then he could pop plenty of them over the left field wall. Oriole Park was a much more hitter-friendly ballpark in 2019, and it was honestly leaned a little pitcher-friendly in 2024. So the ballpark adjustments also adds to Gunnar Henderson's season being more impressive and being better than league average, at least better versus the average than Mancini's was. And that's why it's a great way to compare players year to year, era to era, and things like that. And why use the stat? It encompasses everything. Like, for example, batting average only tells you hits over at bats. Last year, Jorge Mateo had a 229 batting average and Anthony Santander had a 235 batting average. Old school thinking would tell you Anthony Santander was maybe slightly better than Jorge Mateo last year. By WRC plus, Mateo was at 87, Santander was at 129, because a lot more of Santander's hits were extra base hits and homers. A lot of Mateo's hits were singles, and he didn't do much more at the plate. That is why these further stats like this are important. And yes, you can use things like on base slugging. OPS, which is on base plus slugging, is a much better stat than batting average that I also like to use. But On base plus slugging, OPS, doesn't adjust for the ballpark and doesn't adjust for the era, which makes it not as precise as WRC plus. And I think WRC plus is so great because it's much easier, maybe not to understand in the weeds, but to understand how to compare players. If you see somebody with an 827 OPS, I think you know that's good, but it's hard to put a number on how good. WRC plus, if you see a 120 WRC plus, you know that player is 20% better than league average. You know 100, an easy number to remember, is league average, and it makes it, I think, just a lot more digestible. That is why I use that stat, and that is kind of the explainer. Now, a few more counting stats that I will use. One is strikeout rate and walk rate. These are a little more simple. Strikeout rate and walk rate is just number of strikeouts divided by number of plate appearances in a season. How often you strike out or how often you walk when you get to the plate. I think it's more important to talk about what is league average here when I represent these stats. So about 8% for a walk rate is league average for a hitter in Major League Baseball last year. And about 22% is league average for a strikeout rate. So anything significantly above or below those numbers is interesting. For example, Colton Cowser had about a 31% strikeout rate last year, 9% above the average. That's really, really high. It was one of the highest in Major League Baseball. Meanwhile, Ryan O'Hearn's 14% strikeout rate was 8% below the league average. That was super, super low. He was a big-time contact hitter. And Ryan Mountcastle was right around league average at 22.5%. Gunnar Henderson right around league average at 22%. Makes you think about those guys a little bit in terms of the strikeout rate. I will reference those things just because strikeouts, not awful, but you'd rather put the ball in play, and walks are another good way to get on base. And the final counting stat to talk about is Babip. You may have heard me mention Babip before. Babip stands for batting average on balls in play. So this is not your normal batting average, which is hits over at bats. Batting average on balls in play is your batting average on balls that you put actually into the field of play. So the at-bats that are taken out are strikeouts and home runs, because technically home runs, they go over the wall. They are not in play. So it is hits minus homers divided by, on the bottom side, total at-bats minus, in parentheses, strikeouts plus home runs. And that gives you your batting average on balls that you are specifically putting in play. And the league average was right around 290 last season. So when a ball gets put in play and it's not a home run, on average, it is a hit about 29% of the time last year, about a 290 Babip across the league. Anything heavily above that means you're getting pretty lucky. And anything heavily below that means there's not a lot of luck on your side. And it usually averages out throughout a full season, but it can really explain some small sample size stats. And I will talk about it a lot early in seasons. For example, Ryan Mountcastle through play on Monday is hitting 324 with a 128 WRC plus. He's had a great start to this season, but he is running a 414 Babip. Remember, 290 is league average. Up at 414, that generally means a lot of grounders are sneaking through, a lot of bloop hits are falling in. You are getting a good amount of luck. And sometimes guys will just run higher Babips because they are really, really good hitters. But other times when running a Babip that high, over 400, it generally means there's some luck involved and generally means you can expect the overall numbers to come down a little bit. On the flip side, Adley Rutschman is running a 250 Babip, 40 points under the average. We should expect his stats to get a little better as the season goes on. And Cedric Mullins, who has been arguably the Orioles' best hitter so far this year with a 190 WRC plus, which means he is 90% better than league average so far this year. He is running a 280 Babip, which is right around the league average of 290. What that tells you is the hot start for Mullins is pretty real. He's producing, and not a lot of it is luck involved. Really, none of it is luck involved. Like, he is just having good at-bats and has been really, really good through the first 2 weeks of this season. So that is how I kind of use that stat to put into perspective, especially in short sample sizes early in seasons as well. So those are the counting stats, the things you can break down statistically and put the numbers, do some division, do some multiplication, and get those numbers. But there's also a lot of rate stats and StatCast metrics that I talk about. These things can also be measured, but they are not results-based. They are more prediction stats. They are process stats, and they can be harder to kind of get on board with. But we're going to talk about those things like hard hit rate and barrel rate coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I'm a fan of the classic variety. I just love cracking open the shell for that satisfying crunch. The in-shell options, they're a classic favorite. But a lot of people love the no-shells variety. It's an easy grab-and-go snack with some amazing flavors over at Wonderful Pistachios as well. So get snackin' and get crackin' with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So we move on from what I would call the counting stats to more of the rate stats, the StatCast stats. When I talk about StatCast and Baseball Savant, it is a website I visit frequently, and I show a lot of players' Baseball Savant pages to show the red and the blue and how good they are behind the scenes and how good predictively they should be as a season goes on. There are a lot of stats that you can find on StatCast and Baseball Savant. It is a great place to look up baseball data, but there are some specific ones that I'm going to talk about that I really, really do rely on. So for example, if you are watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, this is Gunnar Henderson's Baseball Savant page from the 2024 season when he was incredible. You see all that red. Red is good on the Baseball Savant page. He's in the 90 plus percentile in a lot of these expected stats, the hard hit rates, a lot of stuff that usually leads to good statistics. And that's what we're going to talk about here. These things leading eventually to better performance. They don't guarantee better performance. Like WRC plus is a counting stat. If you have a high WRC plus, that means you are producing as a hitter. Now we're going to talk about hard hit rate. If you have a high hard hit rate, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you have good stats right now, but it predicts that you will in the future. So hard hit rate is one that I talk about a lot. A hard hit ball in baseball is a ball that comes off the bat with an exit velocity of 95 miles per hour or above. What is an exit velocity? That is the velocity measured as the speed of the ball as it comes off the bat. So not the speed of the pitch coming in, but a lot of exit velocity force is provided by the hitter. When you make contact with the ball and it starts moving in the other direction, what is the speed at that point? That is the exit velocity. The hardest exit velocity in baseball last year, O'Neal Cruz hit a ball 121.5 miles an hour. Generally, you see Aaron Judge and guys like Giancarlo Stanton at the top of those leaderboards as well. But really, if you've shown in your career you can hit the ball over 110 miles per hour at some point with an exit velocity, you're in really good shape. Hard hit percentage. But the hard hit percentage stat is just the percentage of your batted balls in play, then not just batted balls in play, batted balls in general, that includes home runs, that are 95 miles per hour or above in their exit velocity. So Aaron Judge last year, he led all of baseball, 61% hard hit rate. Among qualified hitters, Sal Frelick came in last at 19%. So there is a large discrepancy in hard hit rate. Guys who are big league level hitters all do it a little bit differently. Now, the league average last year was right about 40%. So right in the middle of the league, you're looking at a 40% hard hit rate. 40% of the time, you're hitting the ball hard when you make contact, 95 miles per hour or above for your exit velocity. And anything above 45%, you're looking at the top quarter of major league hitters. That is really good. Anything above 50%, those are like the super elite players. For example, Gunnar Henderson was just at about 54% for his hard hit rate last year. Yeah, he finished 4th in AL MVP voting. He is one of the elite players, and his ability to hit the ball hard really, really helps him. Also, Jordan Westburg, Ryan Mountcastle, Colton Cowser, and Jackson Holliday all had hard hit rates above 45% last year. That is really good. It's not Gunnar at 54%, which was 8th in Major League Baseball, but being above 45 puts you in the top quarter of hitters. Then you have Ryan O'Hearn. He was at right about 40%. He was basically a league average hitter for hard hit rate. And then Cedric Mullins at about 33%, so about 1/3 of his balls were hit hard. That was the lowest on the Orioles and was in the 16th percentile in baseball. So not as low as it gets, but the lowest on the O's. And so far this year, 11 of the Orioles' 13 main hitters have a hard hit rate above the average of 40%. That is really good. That means the Orioles are making solid contact as a team so far this year. But I get it, right? You could ask, why does this stat matter, Connor? It's not a counting stat. Even if WRC plus seems very high level, at the end of the day, if I tell you Cedric Mullins is a 190 WRC plus, that's tangible. Those are results based. His results are 90% better than league average. Hard hit rate is not results based. You could hit a ball 115 miles an hour off the bat, and it could be hit right at the center fielder on a line, and he could catch it, and it's an out. That is a bad result for you and a bad result for your team. So I understand the skepticism of, why do you care about these things? They don't directly lead to good or bad results on the field. And that is correct. They don't directly lead to it, but generally it leads to good results. The reason why a hard hit ball is considered at 95 miles per hour exit velocity or higher, because the data has shown that once a ball gets to 95 miles an hour or above, it becomes statistically significant. The jump in production from just like 94 to 95 is big enough where 95 becomes the cutoff, where the graph goes exponential in terms of your production versus your exit velocities. Of all hitters in all of Major League Baseball, in the entire 2024 season, a hard hit ball had a 490 batting average with a 966 slugging percentage last year. Let me say that again. A hard hit ball had a 490 batting average and a slugging percentage, not an OPS, a slugging percentage of 966. That would be, put together, the greatest hitter of all time if they put up those stats. That's why hitting the ball hard is important, because the graph is linear. The harder you hit the ball, the better your stats are going to be. But once you get to 95 and above, it starts to become exponential, the growth of your production versus your hard hit rates. And it's really daunting when you see the batting average. Remember, 490 when it's above 95. For batted balls between 90 and 94.9 miles an hour last year, the batting average was 237. You would think it would be like 30 or 300, I would say, 350. No. It goes from 490 to 237 when you just drop down 5 miles per hour. That is why getting hard hit balls is something I talk about basically in every single episode when I recap a game, because it at least predicts performance. It doesn't line up one for one, because sometimes you hit a screamer right to the shortstop, and sometimes you chop a ball into the ground and it's a slow roller and nobody can get to it. It's a base hit. Sometimes you hit a screamer and it's robbed at the fence. And sometimes you hit a lazy pop-up that gets caught in the sun and falls in for a base hit. Baseball is a cruel game, but it also is why even those stats like WRC plus doesn't tell the whole story, because you're getting some luck baked in there of balls falling in. Hard hit rate, you can't get lucky and hit the ball hard. You got to have skill. You got to have bat speed. You got to have strength. You got to have the tools at the plate to smash the baseball. So if you have bad stats, but a good hard hit rate, that predicts breaking out of your slump, or you're going to be better as your season goes on or your career goes on. It's good for evaluating prospects. It's good for players as they move forward and get more at bats in their career. And it's a good predictive metric. And it's also good to think about how hitters process at bats. If Gunnar tonight rips a ball to second at 112 off the bat and it's caught by the second baseman, he's going to be upset, but he's going to know he hit the ball hard. Here's a better example. Jackson Holliday. If he had 4 at-bats in today's game, 2 of them he scorched down the first baseline at 110, and they both were diving plays made by the first baseman. Then his other 2 at-bats, he hit little dribblers the other way down the third baseline, and they both ended up being infield hits. The 2 infield hits are better for the team, better for the Orioles right now, better for his batting average, better for his stats. However, for the long-term prognosis of Jackson Holliday and how good he can be and how good a level he can get to moving forward, I'd much rather see the screamers off the bat that are caught, because I know he can hit the ball that hard, and more times than not, it's going to become a hit, basically, right? 490 batting average on hard hit balls. It's going to predict that Jackson eventually is going to be a better hitter. And that comes in at an even higher rate with barrel rate, or barrel percentage. That is calculated by the number of barrels divided by your number of plate appearances at the plate. What is a barrel? A barrel is a ball put in play that is calculated by the combination of exit velocity and launch angle that leads you to about a 500 batting average and a 1,500 slugging percentage. What is launch angle? Launch angle is the angle the ball comes off the bat when you hit it. A high launch angle generally means the ball goes straight up, a lot of pop flies, a lot of flyouts. A low launch angle or a negative launch angle is when you beat the ball directly into the ground. In the middle is when you're hitting those line drives. A barrel has to be a ball at least 98 miles per hour for exit velocity. And then it's kind of a little window that moves. As you hit the ball harder, the launch angle increases to get to a barrel. Essentially, this stat helps you separate the guys who hit the ball hard just for show and the guys who hit the ball hard and actually use it for good stats and do damage. Because a ground ball cannot be a barrel. So if you're hitting the ball hard a lot, but it's a lot of hard hit grounders, you're not going to get a high barrel rate, and that's not going to lead to a lot of hits. The best you can do on a hard hit grounder is maybe a double if you hit it right down the line. Otherwise, most of the field, best you can do on a hard hit grounder is a single. The outfielder gets to it, gets it back in. You hit the ball in the air, you get a lot of doubles, triples, and a lot of home runs that way. You can't get anything more than maybe a lucky double if you're just hitting the ball on the ground. That's why launch angle and that's why barrels are important. For example, last year, Ryan Mountcastle and Colton Cowser each had an identical 45.2% hard hit rate. That's good. We talked about 45% being a really good rate. They must have both had great seasons. And they were both above average hitters. But Colton Cowser had a 13.3% barrel rate. That is really good. Ryan Mountcastle had an 8.8% barrel rate. That's solid. So it ended up that Cowser had a more productive season. He had a 120 WRC plus. Mountcastle had a 108 WRC plus, because when Cowser was hitting the ball hard, he was doing more damage. He was hitting it on the sweet spot more. He was hitting the ball at a better launch angle. He was launching it while Mountcastle was hitting more ground balls or more pop flies. Cowser was basically hitting more solid line drives. They're leaving the ballpark. And that's why Mountie had 13 homers and Cowser hit 24 last year. That's another reason why. That's why the barrel percentage is important as well. And then the last thing with the StatCast things that I'll talk about is whiff rate. That is just number of swings and misses divided by number of swings. I'll sometimes use it to overall show a player that swings and misses too much. Like Colton Cowser had a 44% whiff rate last year. That was in the 16th percentile of baseball. That is not good. Adley Rutschman had a 17% whiff rate last year. That's in the 89th percentile. He makes a lot of contact. But I use it more so to show guys struggling against certain pitches. So Colton Cowser, when he was slumping last year, why was he doing it? Well, he had a 43% whiff rate against changeups. He just could not make contact with a changeup. When Jackson Holliday was struggling last year, why was he? He had a 34% whiff rate against fastballs. That is the highest on the Orioles. That's not what you want. Meanwhile, it shows you why some guys are succeeding the ways they are. Ryan O'Hearn cut his strikeout rate tremendously last year. He put the ball in play way more often. How did he do it? You could not get a fastball by Ryan O'Hearn last year. His whiff rate against sinkers and four-seamers were both under 10%. That is an absurdly low swing and miss rate against those pitches. And pitchers throw more fastballs than anything. If you were throwing O'Hearn a fastball and he's going to swing at it, generally he was putting it in play last year. And that is how he was avoiding strikeouts. That is where that stat comes into play as well. So we've talked about the counting stats. We've talked about the rate and StatCast stats. Now let's talk about how do they come together to evaluate hitters? Why are they important? And does it actually help you better evaluate players? We'll talk about that to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you realize how much you're spending on things like food delivery. Then you can budget smarter and save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. So to finish things off on this Stat Explainer episode, let's talk about how does this all come together. And I think it comes together with expected stats. You may hear me talk about expected batting average or expected slugging percentage. That is a stat that shows what a guy's batting average or slugging percentage should be based on their exit velocity, their hard hit rate, their barrels, their launch angle, all that good stuff. How well they're hitting the ball versus what the results actually are. For example, Adley Rutschman has a 236 average and a 436 slugging percentage through Monday's game this season. But he has a 292 expected average and a 539 expected slugging, which means he's hitting the ball better than he is getting rewarded for. And that is how the production and then the things like the hard hit rate come together to work in harmony. So you can, similar to Babip, figure out guys who are about to slump, guys who are about to get hot, how lucky or unlucky they are getting throughout the season. Now, this is a lot of stuff that we cover. Check out the Fangraphs Glossary. It does a great job of explaining all their stats. Browse Baseball Savant. It's got colors. It's cool to look at. It really explains these stats and puts them into perspective. Okay, there's this number. How does it fit into or compare to other players in the league? Baseball Savant is a fantastic website for that. Peek behind the curtain. Every single time I recap a game, I do not have the MLB.com box score in front of me. I have the Baseball Savant StatCast box score in front of me. It gives me the basics, but it also gives me all the deep dive numbers that I talk about when I recap a game. Go on Baseball Savant, look at some of the game box scores. It'll open up a lot more of what you can learn and see and watch about the game. And feel free to reach out and ask questions. I can try to answer them. Reach out, lockedonorioles@gmail.com is the email. I don't know everything. There's still some stats and data I'm still trying to figure out myself. But these are the things I feel like I have a solid handle on and that I can talk about and run you through and use them to evaluate the performance of the Orioles. And none of this is to say the base level stats are bad. I still think batting average and doubles and on base percentage and RBI and runs scored, they still have a place in our game. Absolutely. But these other stats are here, and this data is here to help you better understand the game, better understand the players, why they're getting unlucky. You might just say, oh, that's baseball. A guy hits a line drive and it gets caught. Now you can understand how unlucky he was and how likely those are to turn into hits further on, and why a guy went 0 for 10 one week, but he was actually hitting the ball hard and he should break out of it. And he should be a better player moving forward. Helps you evaluate guys even better. And that's the final question. Does it actually help? Well, yeah, these are some cherry-picked Orioles examples. But for example, Colton Cowser, he first came up in 2023. He was terrible. He was bad. The O's had to send him right back down. But then he came up last year and should have won AL Rookie of the Year. How'd he do it? Well, while he was bad results-wise in 2023, he was posting a 43% hard hit rate, which is well above the league average. That could show you that, hey, this guy is hitting the ball hard. He's not getting rewarded, but generally, 43% of the time, hard hit rate, hard hit balls generally have a batting average around 500. He's going to get better luck next year. And he did, and he had a really, really good season. Jackson Holliday, he was real bad last year, but he ran a 45% hard hit rate. And now he's hitting over 300 and he's starting to get rewarded. And it also works on the flip side. Cedric Mullins, when he had that breakout 30-30 season back in 2021 and was an all-star, he ran just a 39% hard hit rate, below league average, an 8% barrel rate. It was fine. Those stats are generally not going to produce a 30-homer season. And guess what? We haven't really seen Cedric Mullins get close to a 30-homer season since then. He has not been the same player that he was in 2021. Those further stats can help you predict those things as well. And you can say, Connor, I don't really want to predict stuff. I'm just taking in the game. That's totally fine. But I hope this stuff at least opens some doors for you, helps you understand the game a little bit better, maybe intrigues you a little bit to look up other things. Or you might say, I don't care about any of this. I just want to watch the game, look at the batting average, and go from there. That's totally fine too. Baseball is a beautiful, amazing game. It is the best sport that we have. Enjoy it however you would like. But the reason I do an episode like this is because I know I talk about a lot of these stats on every single episode. I want to make sure I'm not turning anyone away by referencing these things. I want to make sure that everyone who tunes into the show, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, can be in line and at least know what I'm talking about when I do. I can help you better understand the game a little bit more and make baseball truly, because it should be, and it isn't always this way, which is very frustrating, but baseball truly should be for everyone to see, for everyone to enjoy in any way they would like to. This is my way to open that up to others. If you feel like you're pushed out of the game because you can't quite understand the stats that are being talked about, hopefully this does help you out. But that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I am back tomorrow to recap games 2 and 3 of the D-back series. Remember to check out Luke's postcast here on the feed as well. believe he'll have one for after that Tuesday night game because I did not talk about it here on Wednesday's episode. Last thing is Friday, because the Orioles have the day off Thursday when they come back from the West Coast, I'll be doing my first in-season mailbag of the year. So if you have mailbag questions, send them in. LockedOnOrioles@gmail.com, and I'll answer them on Friday's mailbag episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.